Hi, beautiful humans, and welcome to this transmission. Thanks for tuning in today. What I actually wanted to share about today is just a quick summary of how I've experienced the distinction between consciousness, healing, and ascension. So the three terms, I suppose, there's a lot of crossover in the way that they're used, or a lot of overlap. But they, to me, and in my experience, and when I've been trying to, I suppose, speak of my own spiritual experience, they have different tones to them and they have different qualities about them. And so what I'm going to share, it's not, when we're talking about the metaphysical, we're not talking about concrete definitions of things. The Tao says that, or a quote is that the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao, or something, paraphrasing. And so to try and put into words what is at times quite an unspeakable experience, different people may state things in different ways. So I'm excited to share with you just how I've understood it, and how, in observing the process, how I've been able to kind of put it into form, give it some form and some structure. So, so all three of them are pretty critical or important in terms of our human journey, our spiritual journey, or our journey to bridge the human experience to the soul and the higher self and the higher dimensional experience. So first, consciousness. Now, we always hear about our higher consciousness, expanded consciousness, and it's something that we're all noticing at the moment, because as our planet is receiving a lot of cosmic energy, people who are even passive in their spiritual experience are noticing shifting consciousness. People are generally becoming more aware of things that might be beyond our limited materialistic experience. The old, work, eat, sleep, repeat pattern is no longer sitting well for people. So consciousness, to me, is basically speaking of our level of awareness. It's how much of the, you could also say how much of the light spectrum we're able to perceive. But then that also stems into the ascension aspect, which I'll also speak about. So the thing with consciousness, we can actually, and I think it's easy to get a bit caught up on this, is that we can have a love-based consciousness, and we can actually have a fear-based consciousness. And most of us are running something in between. So as our consciousness and our access to expanded awareness grows, we aren't necessarily, or we aren't automatically experiencing the highest versions of reality. Now, why is that? Because healing is a really important part of enabling our access to a pure love consciousness. So, so when we do expand our consciousness, we're seeing more, but we're also still seeing it through the filter of our human form. So our human form and the layers of our human awareness hold certain aspects of density, maybe wounding, maybe pain stories. And I talk a lot about pain stories in the work I do with clients, is about clearing those pain stories. So in healing, when we are active participants in our healing process, is when we look to resolve and clear, in whatever method that is. Maybe it's energy work, maybe people use talk therapy. There are all sorts of somatic practices as well. But so as we do the healing work, we are then clearing the dense frequency, the dense vibrations from our vessel. So it's one thing to have an expanded consciousness, but if I speak from my own experience, back when I went through an awakening, my consciousness, my access to consciousness went through the roof. But the way I was experiencing it and perceiving it was still very much based in the density of my lived experience. So I hadn't started doing the healing work. And so as I've progressed through the healing and devoted myself to the inner journey and really taking responsibility for the way that I'm experiencing things, not only am I able to live with that expanded consciousness where I might be more aware of subtle energies, but the subtle energies that I'm actually aware of are more of, I'm receiving them from a love-based frequency. So I hope that's landing for you. So, let me see. Yeah. So even if we have a more expanded sense of awareness and consciousness, we can still live quite a dense reality or a dense fear-based reality. We can perceive people are out to get us. We can still perceive, we might see some of the density in the world, and that is then also reflected in our inner frequency. So with our higher consciousness, we can actually still inflict a lot of suffering on ourselves because we're not freeing ourselves from that which does cause suffering, from that energy, from those vibrations and frequencies and stories. So healing is the empowerment part of this. So we are beings of contrast, and healing is kind of like bringing a resolution to that contrast. So it's not about saying, that through healing, we come to a point where we're able to experience our shadow without calling it bad and without negating it, without rejecting those parts of ourselves. So we might still see shadow or some darkness. So we will remain beings of contrast as long as we exist in a polar reality, a reality based on magnetism and polarization. But when we actively look at the healing process and we create a resolution with the unprocessed energy, then those pain stories and that density stops being projected into our reality, and it stops inhibiting the way that we're able to perceive love. So that's big. And this is the concepts I'm talking about, you'll experience them through your own journey. You probably are experiencing them through your own journey. So I invite you to kind of see how this could overlay to what you've been experiencing, especially in the last few years. So the healing process is kind of clarifying our light body. And, in that clearing, it allows our expanded consciousness to enjoy that higher vibration, without the blurred lens. That's probably a good analogy. So consciousness is when we have an expanded lens or focus or field of focus. And healing is what actually clears that lens so that we can see clearly and truly, because it can be very challenging when we first start to see a broader perspective, but we're seeing it through the filter of limitation and other people's creations as well. We take on other people's stories or judgments and perceptions. So with healing, there are a lot of layers, and there are a lot of different approaches. Healing, we're blessed to live in a time where our consciousness is being drawn forward, and this is why I think a lot of people who aren't necessarily as active in their ascension process or healing process might be suffering a little more, is because as the consciousness expands, there is light shone on what is unhealed, and more things come to light. And so if we're not active in that process, that healing can be quite painful and confusing because we don't really know what's going on. But once you start actively seeking out ways in which you can feel more whole, and ways in which you can connect more deeply with your authentic truth, which is love, the more that you can acknowledge and embrace fear-based aspects or shadow aspects, so that they can be resolved and integrated instead of rejected, buried, suppressed, then that will bring more joy and more pleasure to your consciousness as it expands, to your conscious experience. And that's when we get to ascension. So, ascension's a funny thing as well. Ascension is very similar to this expansion in consciousness, but ascension is, I guess, what occurs when we're able to have the wholeness of healing and consciousness come together in an embodied experience. So that's actually one of the keys from my own experience and from the work that I've done, is that even once our consciousness undergoes, takes on the healing work, and we might have an ascended awareness, if we're not the embodiment of that love and the embodiment of that vibration of love and peace and compassion and oneness, unity consciousness, that connection with all other beings, if we're not living in the embodiment of that, then there's a misalignment between the layers of our being. So ascension for me is also a descension process. So we have to take care of ourselves on all the levels, on the subtle levels, on the emotional levels, on the mental, spiritual, the etheric, and then the physical levels. And often that will mean taking care of, what we put into our bodies, so that we're ingesting, food that maybe we've blessed, food that we are grateful for, food that is nutritious, not overly processed or modified. And so, yeah, it's the culmination of conscious healing. Ascension is an embodiment process, because in all of this new age talk, we are ascending consciously as a species, as a collective. But it's not a matter of somewhere in the ethers, our self-awareness kind of just goes pop, don't need a body anymore. It's not like that. Where our challenge as a collective is to bring our form into a higher dimension of experience and a higher dimension of manifestation, higher frequency. So, we can have great advanced consciousness, love-based consciousness, where we're not jumping at our shadows anymore. But we won't be complete in that. We are whole and complete. Let me rephrase. I don't believe there's anything wrong with any of us. We're all just at different stages. And to quote someone is, we are all whole and complete, just at different stages of remembering. But part of that remembering process is cleansing through the healing, not just our etheric body or our subtle bodies, but also our physical form, so that our cells can upgrade, so that our cells can manifest, the highest form of our spiritual selves. So, yes, so when this happens, we're disengaging from what I call the hooks that negative experiences can actually attach to. So, people will talk about karma, as we heal. and we go through experiences, we're also resolving karmic experiences, so that, what may be considered negative in our reality can no longer magnetize to us. There's no matching frequency for it to connect to. So, and this is when love really does replace fear. And that's where we're heading, right? That is where we're heading. So I've just made a few notes about how we can support ourselves in this process. And the number one point I always make is this non-judgmental curiosity. So being able to inquire as to what you're experiencing, instead of just going through life on autopilot, potentially looking back going, why me? Why me? Instead, look at, how is this serving me? How can I actively engage with this? Or how can I perhaps understand something better so that I don't experience it again? So openness and a love. And, we don't want to go about this toxic positivity where we're forcing a loving attitude, because it's not authentic. So when there's pain, acknowledge there's pain. When there's resentment, acknowledge there's resentment. But don't accept it as your truth, I guess, is the best way to put that. Don't accept it as being an unchangeable thing, because our unpleasant emotions and experiences are simply opportunities for us to move further through those healing portals that bring us then more into alignment, more into that that elevated consciousness, healing, and ascension. So so non-attachment, surrender, and trust. There are three very similar themes there. When we're doing this work and we're progressing, it's super important that we don't get stuck in judgment or attachment to maybe what we've done in the past or how we think things should be. Surrender and trust also allow us to perhaps move forward with that without that certainty. Certainty is based on the known, and certainty is based on containing our experiences within what is known. And we're moving into unknown territory, as a collective, and it's very exciting. But they're just a few, I suppose, key qualities that you can take on if you choose to start expanding into this journey a little more consciously, or a little bit more actively. So just that conscious inquiry, the openness, a love of self. So with non-judgmental acceptance of what has been, but with knowing there's deliberate choice about what will be and about how you choose to experience things. Non-attachment, surrender, trust, and compassion. So beautiful ones, I'll leave you on the note of compassion. If you did enjoy this video, please do like it. Please do subscribe so that you can see more content when I release it. I'll be looking at putting out some meditations, more of this sort of stuff. Or if you have any questions and would like me to answer them online, please do send them through. So thank you for tuning in. Lots of love, and may you be well.